Good morning to everybody. Good day, good afternoon, wherever you may be. It is I, the Desert Viking, and I'm wishing you all a peace profound from the scorching deserts of the southwest United States, where we are in the grip of summer. And, well, the deserts are not a very pleasant place in the summer. But the deserts have always provided me a lesson in that, as inhospitable as it is outside, and as hot as it is outside, and it never rains, there are so many flowers and plants that continue to thrive. So the lesson to that is, no matter how hostile your environment, you can easily shape that and thrive in it. So that's what the desert has taught me in my few years that I've spent living here. So thank you for joining me. This is take 2 on a video. Wasn't pleased with the first one, and so I kind of wanted to reshoot it. The point and topic of today, of this video, is the philosophical Qabalah, or how can I use the Qabalah to be meaningful in my life, other than just, I'm studying books and I know what these things mean, but, how do you apply those? And with the Qabalah, there are different levels of applications that one can undertake. One of the most common is the philosophical aspect, where you use the Qabalah as a philosophical tool in your own life. The second form is meditative, and the third way is practical. And we're not dealing with practical application of the Qabalah on this. However, we are touching on philosophical mostly, but also meditative. One of the most common questions that I receive when I talk about the Qabalah is, how is this even of any use? Because when you dig into the tomes, the books, dealing with Qabalah, and you start looking at the Zohar, you start looking at Sefer Yetzirah, you start looking at Sefer Raziel, there's a number of books on the subject. The more practical amongst us may struggle in finding the usefulness of what they're reading. And so what I wanted to touch on today is an example of a philosophical application of the Qabalah to help bring about balance. Now, for me, I am an adherent of the middle path, or the gray path, as I've also heard it called. And what that means for me is that I don't walk purely in the light and I don't walk purely in the dark, that the two things, like yin and yang, are intertwined with each other, and that you need both in equal measure. And the tree of life represents that. So the image of the tree of life I have up on screen here, you see we have a black pillar and a white pillar. The black pillar is Boaz, the white pillar is Jachin, or Yakin, or however you want to call it. I've heard it called many different things. The black pillar is the pillar of strength. The white pillar is the pillar of beauty. And those two pillars pull against each other all the time. And while they're pulling against each other, they're creating that equilibrium in the middle. It is that tension. It is that tension from those two pillars that creates the solid surface on which we exist. This reminds me of the checkered tiled floor in lodges, the black and white checkered tile floor. For me, is a reminder that life is the checkered tile. It is both good and bad, light and dark, whatever words you want to use. And each of those words can have its own philosophical rabbit hole we could spend hours on. And I'm not interested in that right now, but you get the general idea. So those two pillars are pulling against each other. And the middle pillar represents you. Now, if you're walking the gray path, if you're walking the path of equilibrium, and in Freemasonry we walk the middle pillar, I think that is, for me, the lessons that I get out of it. And maybe that's just my own interpretation, but you have to keep yourself in check. And keeping yourself in check is not an easy task. And I would say almost nobody can keep themselves in complete harmony, as that is a daily struggle for everybody. And for those of us who think about it more, I think we're more cognizant of the fact that we can be knocked out of balance and kind of need to bring ourselves back in. So that's what one of the things I use the Qabalah for. Now I'm going to bring up a hypothetical situation, and it's a common situation. I'm just going to use it for demonstration purposes, and we're going to apply the Qabalah to how one might rectify this situation. There are obviously unnumbered scenarios that can exist. This is just one. So if we want to keep ourselves balanced, we want to keep ourselves within both the light and the dark. We know that we have a series of elements we have to balance. And with the tree of life, each of those spheres, or Sephiroth, represents different aspects of creation, and can also be applied to every aspect of your own personal life. And every one of those Sephiroth represents something good, but when you have too little of it or too much of it, it becomes bad. In fact, there is the tree of death. The tree of death follows the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, where each of those Sephiroth has a shell or a qliphoth that surrounds it, that is the darker version of the Sephiroth. So where the Sephiroth would represent the light and the good, the tree of death represents the not so good, the dark or the bad, the infernal. Because both of those elements are part of creation and life. So in this hypothetical scenario, where the question is, how do I use the Qabalah to exercise balance in my life? Let's say the scenario is this. The first lesson, the first pointer, is that you have to be brutally 100% honest with yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to know what drives you, what motivates you, what triggers you, what upsets you. As unflattering as those things may be, pretending they don't exist or hiding from them is useless. And in fact, if you're not honest with yourself, then being able to use something like the Qabalah to help balance yourself won't work, because you have to be able to identify truly the weaknesses in your character or self that are out of balance. So that's number one. Those and again, those are usually not very flattering things, but understand that every human being has those qualities about them, and we need to keep ourselves in balance. So let's say that common scenario, you need to feel appreciated, you need to feel accepted to be happy in a group. And let's say you're not getting that. So you're out of balance. Let's say that you're in a group and you're not getting the things you need. Now, whether or not one can argue, do you truly need to be appreciated, is a whole other story. And this is where people will dogpile on and say that that's narcissistic and that's this, that, and the other. Every human has a base level of needs. And one of those needs is to be in a community of sorts and be contributing in some useful manner at some level and be appreciated for it at some level. That's a common thing with people. It makes us feel good. All right. So I don't necessarily think that in this scenario that that's a bad thing. But let's say in this scenario you're in a group and you're experiencing this dissatisfaction and it's throwing you off. Let's say that you've done some work and it was largely passed over, and then someone else did the same work and they were given a bunch of praise and promoted for it at work. Okay, maybe that's the scenario. That's also a very common scenario. Being in management, that's something that we have training on. In college degrees, where if you're doing any management courses, they'll you take those lessons to heart, where you have to be equal and fair amongst your workforce, and if you're not, people will get out of sorts and you'll lose people. Okay, so that's the scenario. The scenario is we have a person who needs to feel appreciated and useful, and they're in a situation where they're doing stuff, but they're not appreciated, and they're largely ignored. But other people doing the same thing are being appreciated. So it's got them comparing, and it's got them disgruntled. So what I've identified on the Tree of Life here are 3 different Sephiroth that are glowing. They're towards the bottom. The 3 glowing ones. These are the Sephiroth that have now been jilted out of balance. So I'm not going to go over what all these Sephiroth are in this one. I will be doing a video on the individual Sephiroth and then the paths themselves, which are the lines that connect those. But in this case, I've identified that the white pillar is pulling a little too hard on this individual, and it's causing it to fall out of balance. Now, what is that sphere exactly? So that sphere, the very top glowing sphere, which is the bottom on the white pillar, if you see it on the right, but it's the top of the triangle that's being formed, that is a sphere number 7. That is the sphere, and I always have a hard time pronouncing some of these, but this is a Netzach. And this one is ruled by Venus. This is your emotions. So it is opposed, if you follow that red line across, that is Hod. Hod represents Mercury, Hermes Trismegistus, and the Archangel Michael. And this one is where your rational thought comes to play. This is where they call this the sphere of the magician, as one of its titles. And so the rational mind, this is the rational mind opposed by the emotional heart, right? So you know we need to keep our emotions in check, but at the same time we can't be over analytical and over critical on the other side. So that's the balance of this particular set of Sephiroth. And if you're not feeling appreciated and you're feeling let down or disappointed, that is an overly emotional state. Because the ideal state in that scenario that we would want to get to if we are trying to ascend to be better people would be that if you are in a situation where you have multiple people and you're doing the same work as someone else, and even if you're doing the same quality of work as someone else and you're being ignored and they're being praised and promoted, the ideal for that would be to feel joy for that person, to have that opportunity, not angst and disappointment and what about me? Okay, so that's the ideal state that we want to get to. So in this case, I've identified that in that scenario, the emotional state is a little over triggered. And that's not saying that it's not valid to feel like you've been passed over and that that's disappointing or even an insult. I understand. We're people. I understand that. I'm saying we want to get to an idealized state where that truly doesn't bother us. That is the level we want to get to. That's the whole point of practicing Qabalah and theurgy in general. We want to elevate ourselves above the pettiness of the material plane. We want to feel joy for our brothers and sisters who do get to experience those type of things and not always be going, well, what about me? Okay, now I know that's not easy. There are, from a psychological standpoint, there are a number of factors we could go into to discuss why wanting to feel needed and whatnot is vital to your survival. So there are, like I said, it's valid and it's legit, but we want to get over that. We want to transcend that. So Netzach, that's the emotional state. The emotional state in this case is overcharged, and that's causing the white pillar to pull a little bit too hard, and the black pillar is not able to keep up with it, and so we're out of balance. Now, what does that affect? Usually in a system, in a machine, it's not ever just one thing that's going to be impacted. It's going to be multiple things that are impacted. And in this case, like I said, I've identified 3 different Sephiroths. So if the catalyst is Netzach number 7 being pulled out of whack, well, if you notice, the connectors are also going to be pulled out of whack. And what connects in this case? One could make the argument that Hod across from it should also be highlighted. But let's say that you rationally can sit down and rationally go, I understand where I should be. I'm repeating exactly what I just said. From a rational standpoint, I understand where I should be, and I want to be there. And rationally, I can come up with other reasons to explain why the situation is what it is. but that doesn't stop the emotional state from being triggered by it. So in this case, I'm saying Hod is functioning normally, but the emotional state is not. So that's why it's not highlighted. If we flow down to the very bottom Sephiroth in that triangle that's lit up, that's Malkuth. Now, Malkuth stands for the kingdom, and Malkuth is the lowest Sephiroth of creation, and that is the one most associated with the physical elements that we know about. And why Malkuth is thrown off balance is because, Malkuth is composed of you'll see it composed of the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Well, each of those has representations of our own inner state, and water is our emotional state. So by the emotional state above it, the spiritually, in the astral triangle, which is the first triangle above, being spheres 7, 8, and 9, Malkuth being sphere 10, Malkuth being the profane or lowest level, the triangle above those three, 7, 8, 9 being the astral level. So Netzach resides in the astral level. By that astral spiritual level being knocked out of kilter, so too does the physical water element be knocked out of kilter. In this case, you have too much water. We have too much water, and that affects Malkuth. And as it's part of a triangle as a whole, that impacts sphere number 9 above it, the middle one. That is foundation. That's Yesod, your foundation. So your foundation in this case is completely off balance because of this scenario. So step one, what I like to do is identify what spheres are being impacted. Now, step two of the Qabalah, what would I do next? Well, I would look at what those spheres represent and how I can go about trying to bring them back into harmony, to bring myself back into equilibrium. That is my goal here, and I want to use the Qabalah to do that. Well, we know Netzach, that is the major point of contention, is the white pillar, or Jachin, is out of sync. So I need to pull it back. Well, we know from physics, if one side's pulling too hard, then we need to put an equal amount of force on the other side. So you can do some devotions to the archangel of Netzach, or Venus, or whatever, do ritual to try to commune with them for assistance, the angels. You can also employ, well, in this case, if the rational mind is working and you think it's working fully functionally, you want to be careful about overcharging the rational mind, because if you're going to overcompensate on one side, I don't think that that's necessarily healthy either. But you might have to put some more energy into the rational mind to basically go, I need to stop and think about this more. I need to meditate on this. Use Hod for that. And then above that, spheres number 5, or is it number? Yeah, it's number 4. Excuse me, number 4. Gebura, strength. That's the red Mars above it. Start tapping into some of that for some inner strength to help pull back those emotions. So if Gebura is about strength and Mars and Kamael is the archangel that presides over Gebura, at least in the standard world that the Qabalah lives in Beria. You can make, again, implore Kamael, I need your strength. I want to align myself to the middle pillar. I want to be the best person I can be, Kamael. And I need your warrior's wisdom. And implore him, meditate on him. And that will bring, hopefully, right, this is the meditative part. You've done the philosophical work, you understand where they lie. Now the meditative work is pull it back. Malkuth, well, we can focus a little bit on Malkuth. Malkuth's archangel is Sandalphon. And Sandalphon is a musician, so I know we can use music to help bring those elements back into play. I can make offerings or pray to Sandalphon for guidance, to bring that, to get some of the water element out of my discharge. There's too much water. It's too emotional. We want emotions as human beings. We just don't want too many emotions. And then above we have Yesod, which is the the foundation, the astral house of illusions. This is where we can do astral temple work or the celestial sanctuary if you're a Rosicrucian. There's many different words for this place, but it's your place of meditation. In fact, I would say that the root you would start at would be the astral temple. You would meditate there and now physically bring these forces back into compliance. Because if you notice what those 3 points are forming, that's a triangle. And a triangle, an equilateral triangle, is 60 degrees on each angle. And a perfectly balanced triangle, therefore, will be 60 degrees on each angle. When one of its sides is pulling too hard, that pulls the whole equilibrium of that triangle out. And you're going to either have an isosceles or an obtuse triangle. And this is where geometry can make a big impact in your life. Just by applying the simple geometrical principles to this problem. We want an equilateral triangle in this case, not one that's all bent out of shape, because a triangle is the strongest geometrical solid. And this is why things like cardboard are made out of many, many triangles. But a triangle weakened cannot support, and a triangle that cannot support will collapse. And in this case, we're losing our equilibrium. We're being pulled into a position or a state of mind we don't want to be in. Now we can get further. I'm coming to the conclusion of this. So we've identified the meditative on the Sephiroth, but notice those paths as well. So there are three, in this case, 3 paths, maybe 4 paths. You identify the paths connecting the problem Sephiroth, and those paths have meanings. Those paths have a Hebrew letter associated with them. That Hebrew letter has a meaning. That Hebrew letter has a major arcana tarot card associated with it. Those are things that you can meditate on. The Sephiroth themselves have the tarot cards. In this case, there's 10 Sephiroth. There's 10 normal suits of cards, right? Or not suits. 10, 1 through ace through 10. So in this case, Malkuth is 10, Yesod 9, and Netzach 7. So you'd find your 7s. Well, what's the issue we're dealing with here? Well, that's emotion. So those are cups. So look at the cups as an alternative. This is just one way. Like, it's not the only way. This is just one way. This is kind of what I do to try to bring myself in line. So do a spread of the cups of those 3 and the major arcana and see what those might reveal to you. There's nothing divination about the tarot being used in that way. It's more of a guide, and using it in conjunction with the Qabalah, and using that to help your brain use those symbols. That's the key. Your brain is using those symbols to come up with ways to bring itself back into equilibrium over a problem. So my friends, that will wrap up this discussion. This is how I can use the Qabalah in a practical sense. Not a practical sense, in a philosophical sense and a meditative sense to solve a problem that I might be having. And this, again, is why Qabalah is one of the cornerstones of my life. It's something I've studied for many years. And as much as I've studied, I'm still only a student, and there's still things I learn about the Qabalah all the time. So it's very deep, one of the deepest subject matters I've ever gotten into in my entire life. Coming on 50 years here pretty soon. This is one of my favorite areas to get into. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. If you liked the video, give me a like. And if you like this content, give me a subscribe. I do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen and watch. And again, the whole point of this is to generate conversation. So if you have anything you'd like to contribute, I would love to hear it. Until next time, my friends, peace profound. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you're staying cool in summer. And we'll talk to you soon.